现场了。Welcome to this special edition of Middle East Now. Israel has carried out a series of airstrikes on Yemen's Houthis. The IDF says it struck the international airport in the Houthi-controlled capital Sana'a, 2 power stations, along with the ports of Hodeidah, Al-Salif and Ras Kantib. Dozens of Israeli jets took part in the operation. The Houthis have launched 4 ballistic missiles at Israel in the past 2 weeks. Let's take a listen to the Prime Minister, followed by the Defence Minister, both commenting on those strikes a short while ago.
We are lighting a second candle of Hanukkah tonight. We are in the war of rebirth, the generation of the Maccabees of our time. The Air Force today attacked targets of the Houthi terrorist organization in Yemen, both on the coastline and in Sana'a. We are determined to cut off this terrorist arm of Iran's evil axis. We will persist in this until we complete the task.
We witnessed a precise operation by the Israeli Air Force, targeting strategic Houthi sites in Yemen, including an airport and a port. As we said, whoever harms Israel, we will harm them. We will hunt down all Houthi leaders and strike them, just as we have done in other places. No one will be able to escape Israel's long arm. We will target them to eliminate threats to the state of Israel.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Doron Avital is the former commander of the Special Forces in the IDF. Welcome, Doron. We're also joined by Ariel Osseran, our Middle East correspondent. Welcome to you both. So, Doron, we're looking at the third and potentially by far the most damaging strike on the Houthis by Israel.
Not only damaging, also in daytime, in the timing of the speech of the leader of the Houthis. So it's really an impressive show of power. Completely synchronized with our allies and coalition. This is a show of power that is very, very impressive. We should look forward. What's the next step? We have to understand also that as the time progresses, we gain more and more info, more and more intelligence, which we didn't have. Yemen wasn't on the top priority of our intelligence officers in the beginning of the war.
Right, because it wasn't a priority in terms of security.
So now we add up the knowledge, we get the bases, we get caches of weaponry, we get maybe position of leaders. So the info is better, the intelligence is better, and the Air Force is showing superb capabilities, very impressive in the Middle East, a show of power, timely, and perfect.
Major General Tomer Bar, who does the job you used to do, right, I think, he said there's a lot more where that comes from.
Yeah, I'm sure, because we really have the capacity, really, in military affairs, it's like a brick after a brick. Capacity takes strength from the capacity before. And as we're getting better in terms of those bricks and capacities, in terms of intelligence, Air Force power, sync with our coalition members because they patrol there. I mean, you have to be completely at sync. We don't want any...
I understand there were dozens of jets, including intelligence planes, not just fighter jets, but spy planes.
Everything. I mean,
planes to knock out the radar. It's a big operation.
A lot of info we take also from our coalition members, for sure. And everything has to be in sync. This one I all the time insist it's a coalition game, but as a coalition member, we have to show our presence. We suffered the most from the Houthis, including, of course, those ships on those waterways, but we have to show our power.
So
we've shown it.
This will have been planned quite a long time in advance.
I'm sure that right now they have planned ahead of time possible attacks to other windows of opportunity, depending on how the Houthis would react, depending on weather, depending on decision, on political climate. I mean, the way it works...
This is not just a reaction to the missile we had a couple of days ago.
The way they work, special ops, like special attacks of the Air Force, they are planned ahead of time. And then there's this concept of window of opportunity. You wait for the window of opportunity to open up. I mean, you prepare the forces, and then you have to get the go from the cabinet. This time, this was a very restricted cabinet, only Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense and Ron Dermer. You get the go, you go, but you have to prepare it ahead of time, for sure.
Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital for now. Thank you very much. And Ariel, a symbolic strike as well, because of course the leader of the Houthis, Abdel Malik al-Houthi, was right in the middle of one of his fiery speeches when the planes arrived.
Not as fiery as former Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, but indeed he has taken the forefront as the main proxy spokesperson with his weekly speeches. Obviously, this is a pre-recorded speech, but Abdul Malik al-Houthi made sure to reference Israeli airstrikes on the Houthis, saying that, quote, Israel's deterrence has failed against our country despite the aggressive raids that targeted civilian facilities in Sana'a and Hodeidah. The aggression on our country will not deter us from continuing our support to the Palestinian people, as if he is responding in real time to Israel's airstrikes. I will just note that Houthi media, Al Masira TV, reporting that 4 people were killed in the strikes on Sana'a and Hodeidah, as well as 16 people injured. 3 are considered missing.
Okay, Ariel, for now, thank you. Well, many here in Israel have been asking, what will it take to stop the Houthis? The group has fired over 300 projectiles at Israel since October 7th, and there are questions over plans to destroy the last active arm of the Iranian axis. Should Israel strike the Houthis directly or go after their patrons in Tehran? Well, Ariel has been putting some of those questions to the former international spokesman for the Houthis, and we can take a listen to his interview now.
علي البخيتي الناطق السابق للحوثيين، السلام عليكم ومرحبا بك.
أهلا وسهلا.
الهجمات من قبل الحوثيين ضد إسرائيل أصبحت حدثا يوميا. كيف تنظر التطورات الأخيرة في الصراع بين إسرائيل والحوثيين؟
باعتقادي أن الحوثيين سيستمرون في استهداف إسرائيل، لأن هذا يزيد من شعبيتهم في الوطن العربي بل وفي العالم الإسلامي، ويجدون أنهم يعني يلقون مدحا كثيرا من هذه الأوساط، بل حتى في بعض الأوساط الغربية اليسارية وغيرها، وهم بحاجة لمثل هذا الإطراء نتيجة لفشلهم في إدارة أحوال المواطنين في الداخل.
تفاجأت لما شفت التصعيد الأخير في الهجمات المتبادلة بين إسرائيل والحوثيين؟
لم يفاجئني التصعيد الأخير. أنا تحدثت أكثر من مرة لوسائل إعلام إسرائيلية أن الحوثيين مع مرور الوقت سيزيدون التكنولوجيا ومدى ودقة صواريخهم، وأنهم سيتلقون مساعدات من إيران ومن روسيا ومن كوريا الشمالية، وكل أعداء الولايات المتحدة وإسرائيل سيجدون الحوثيين فرصة للانتقام من الولايات المتحدة ومن إسرائيل كذلك.
حسب معرفتك، ما مدى جدية مساعدة إيران للحوثيين، وهل هذا الدعم مستمر؟
نعم، سيستمر الدعم الإيراني للحوثيين وبقوة، وبالأخص بعد أن ترك حزب الله المعركة، حماس في أضعف أوقاتها، نظام بشار الأسد سقط، لم يعد لدى إيران حليف قوي يمكن أن تضغط به على الولايات المتحدة وعلى إسرائيل إلا الحوثيين، وبالتالي سيتوجه أغلب الدعم الإيراني إلى الحوثيين، وهذا الدعم سيصب في تل أبيب عبر صواريخ ومسيرات.
في أي أسلوب بيجي هذا الدعم للحوثيين؟
الدعم يأتي على الأغلب تكنولوجيا، خبراء في تصنيع الصواريخ، طائرات بدون طيار، كذلك أموال هائلة تصب للحوثيين في هذا القطاع العسكري تحديدا.
والمساعدة تيجي عبر بحر؟
نعم، السواحل اليمنية ممتدة لآلاف الكيلومترات ولا أحد يستطيع السيطرة عليها، ومن السهولة لإيران أن توصل مساعداتها، بل أن إيران تدخل سفراءها وتعيدهم إلى إيران عبر هذه الموانئ.
الأستاذ البخيتي، ما هي الحلول الممكنة لتمتلك إسرائيل لإنهاء العمليات ضد أراضيها؟
باعتقادي أن الحوثيين ليسوا مشكلة لإسرائيل فقط، الحوثيين مشكلة أولا لنا نحن كيمنيين، مشكلة للإقليم العربي، السعودية والإمارات وباقي دول الخليج، مشكلة كذلك للعالم، وبالتالي يجب أن يكون هناك تحالف دولي لإسقاط سلطة الحوثيين في صنعاء، وليس فقط لتأمين الملاحة البحرية، يجب أن يكون هناك تحالف مشابه للتحالف الذي قضى على داعش والقاعدة في العراق. السعودية والدول العربية وكذلك اليمنيين وبصريح العبارة لن ينخرطوا في تحالف الهدف من تأمين الملاحة الإسرائيلية، لكن الأطراف اليمنية والدول العربية ستنخرط في تحالف دولي يكون الهدف من إسقاط سلطة الحوثيين في صنعاء.
بس بالإضافة للتحالف اللي تحكي عنها، أنت دائما بتقول إنه مشكلة جذرية تلزم حل جذري. ما هو الحل الجذري المطلوب حسب رأيك لإسقاط حكم الحوثيين في اليمن؟
الحل الجذري هو وجود هذا التحالف الدولي الذي تحدثت عنه، هذا التحالف الدولي بالتعاون مع القوات الحكومية اليمنية، بالتعاون كذلك مع السعودية والإمارات. يمكن لهذه القوات اليمنية أن تتحرك على الأرض، ويكون هناك غطاء جوي من التحالف الدولي وكذلك من الدول العربية، وسيسقط الحوثيين سريعا. علينا ألا ننسى أن الولايات المتحدة وبريطانيا والدول الأوروبية هي التي منعت عملية تحرير الحديدة والساحل اليمني في 2018 تحت مسميات إنسانية. الآن هذه الدول باتت تدفع الثمن، وهي نفسها تستهدف الحديدة وتستهدف الكثير من المناطق في صنعاء.
مثير للاهتمام. الأستاذ البخيتي، ما هو الموقف السعودي المطلوب حسب رأيك لما الحوثيين يهددوا بهجمات ضد مواقع أمريكية أبصر وين ما بتكون أيضا في المملكة السعودية؟
السعودية من وجهة نظري هي تريد إسقاط سلطة الحوثيين في صنعاء، لكنها لن تنخرط في تحالف دولي لحماية الملاحة البحرية لأنها تخشى أن يقوم الحوثيين بالانتقام منها. لكن متى ما وجدت الولايات المتحدة أن هناك جدية من الولايات المتحدة والعالم لإنشاء تحالف دولي يهدف إلى إسقاط سلطة الحوثيين في صنعاء، المملكة العربية السعودية ستنخرط في هذا التحالف. السعودية تشعر بالقلق من وجود الحوثيين، وهي أكثر دولة تدفع الثمن.
كلام واضح. علي البخيتي، الناطق السابق للحوثيين، شكرا جزيلا على حضرتك معنا.
العفو، شكرا.
Fascinating interview, Ariel. And just before we get to the content, I mean, tell me a bit about Mr. al-Bukhaiti. How did he come to... he was the spokesman, the international spokesman for the Houthis, and he clearly left the group and is now speaking about how to defeat them. What is his story exactly?
Yeah, so Ali left the Houthis in 2014 when they assumed power in Yemen, and up until that period, they were a political movement responsible for education and other stuff like that. But when they assumed power, they became extreme, joined powers, became more radicalized, joined forces with the Iranians, and they became too extreme for him. So he left. He's in exile right now, living in Europe. This interview didn't tell me where he was, but it's not the first time that he's spoken to Israeli media. It's not the first time he's spoken to I-24 News. Always a pleasure speaking to him. And I think it's very fascinating what he has to say.
Absolutely. Really good insight. Firstly, giving an insight into just how much support Iran is given to the Houthis, but also you can really hear his frustration with the way the international community, notably the Biden administration, stopped the Saudi-led coalition from fighting the Houthis several years ago.
And that's the key here. He's saying not only does there need to be comprehensive coalition, not just Israel, the United States, and the UK, but also Arab countries, but that the goal needs to be to overthrow the Houthi government in Sana'a. Anything short of that will not be able to reach that purpose. They will continue with their activity because what he said at the start of the interview, that the reason the Houthis are continuing with this is they're the poorest country in the world, one of the worst humanitarian crises according to the UN, and so they've set their policy on working against an external enemy. They have no regard to their own people, and as long as that is the situation, they will continue to target Israel, maritime traffic, anything but taking care of their own people.
Ariel, thanks. That's really interesting. Well, let's bring in Emily Milliken. She's a Yemen expert and the Associate Director of the Atlantic Council. And Emily, I hope you were listening to that as well. Fascinating insight from that former spokesman. But given what you know about the Houthis, do you think these latest strikes by Israel are likely to deter them from further attacks?
No, unfortunately, it's really important to remember that even before these latest attacks, the Houthis weathered hundreds of airstrikes from the Saudi-led coalition. And while they may slow them down temporarily, the strikes will not stop them because the group is really adept at moving their leadership and their weaponry to new locations. And there are even reports that they're expanding underground tunnels in Yemen into something similar to what Hamas and Hezbollah are using. Instead, they actually work to strengthen the Houthis in some ways, especially because they act as a distraction, which allows the group to intensify domestic repression and continue expanding their operations in the region.
And what is their motivation, Emily, in continuing these attacks? Because clearly they can't win a war against Israel. Are they acting to protect Iran at this stage, given they're the last active part of the Iranian resistance, or are they acting independently now?
Right now, the Houthis in Iran are aligned in their desires, especially to strike Israel, U.S. assets, and international maritime traffic. But they're not wholesale proxies of Iran. They have different history, ideology, motivations. And so While this has not proven to be an issue over the past year, the strikes are really advancing Houthi individual goals, and the group sees them as fruitful. And that might go on for longer than what the Iranian government sees as useful. By launching these attacks, the Houthis are positioning themselves as this protector of the Palestinians, which garners them new support both domestically and internationally ahead of negotiations with Saudi Arabia. And it also keeps domestic opposition to the group's poor governance down.
And clearly these strikes on the infrastructure, the ports, the international airport in the capital will have an impact on the civilian population who might already be unhappy with the way the Houthis are running the country. Given what's just happened in Syria, do you think that some Yemenis might be encouraged to try and overthrow the Houthis at some point?
For sure, these types of attacks are really fueling public outrage against the Houthis. 17 million people are already food insecure in Yemen. 4.5 million people are displaced. And so we see this already playing out with growing clashes between the Houthis and tribes present in areas under their control. These most recent strikes, destroyed parts of Sana's main terminal, an air control tower, tarmac, as well as power stations and ports. And while these might not be enough to militarily debilitate the group, it will be a major blow to the local population's access to electricity, foreign goods, aid, and the outside world.
And I mean, Israel says it's on a military offensive against the Houthis. It's also on a diplomatic offensive. It's trying to persuade European countries, for example, to put the Houthis on a list of terrorist groups. The US President Joe Biden, of course, took them off and he put them back on a year ago. Are we going to see a much more robust response from incoming President Trump, do you think?
The Houthis, the international community, everybody is certainly expecting a more intense campaign from the incoming Trump administration. Trump ran on this platform of improving the economy, and Houthi maritime attacks could mean prolonged disruptions, high shipping costs, as these freighters are either opting for longer transits or paying tolls in exchange for safe passage. This could potentially damage the economy and pass on costs to consumers. And at the same time, members of the incoming Trump administration, like Rubio and Waltz, have been vocal advocates for reinstating the Houthis' foreign terrorist organization designation. And Rubio himself even advocated for strikes on senior Houthi leadership and weapons depots, as well as arming regional forces in an op-ed he wrote back in June.
Emily, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Emily Milliken at the Atlantic Council there. Well, as we've been discussing, Saudi Arabia did lead a coalition to try and defeat the Houthis several years ago, but in 2018 was forced to abandon that operation due to international pressure, notably from the Biden administration. Well, let's get the view from the Gulf. Bastien Bory joins us now from Dubai. So, Bastien, I mean, the Houthis are also a sworn enemy of Saudi Arabia. They have attacked them in the past. Is Riyadh likely to help, if not Israel directly, but also the United States, to defeat or at least weaken the Houthis?
It's pretty unlikely that the Saudis will be helpful to Israel in the coming weeks. The Saudis are waiting for the US or even China to solve this problem because Riyadh needs to protect its peace agreements with the Houthis and the Iranians. Let's not forget, as you said, that a few years ago the Saudis and Minorities were already bombing Yemen, blockading the country to counter the advance of these Houthis and trying to pacify the Gulf region to satisfy its economic ambitions at the cost of tens of thousands of Yemeni civilians killed. Besides, Saudi Arabia and the UAE are seeing how relatively ineffective the US and UK and now Israeli military involvement are in the Red Sea. These strikes today and in the last few days are doing very little to actually weaken the Houthis because much of their weapons are hidden underground and are pretty much out of danger to such an extent that US and Israeli military analysts are having a hard time finding relevant sites to target.
Nevertheless, they are making a lot of enemies, not just with their attacks on Israel, but also their attacks on international shipping and commerce. They're causing Egypt a lot of problems, for example. And what do they want exactly?
In many ways, the war is a good thing for the Houthis because being targeted by the US and now by Israel makes them visible to the world. in the past have already shown themselves by overthrowing the official government of Yemen. Then in the 2010s, they fought off with some success a military intervention and a long Saudi campaign supported by the USA, which left tens of thousands dead on the ground. And now these Houthis need even more visibility and legitimacy to govern Yemen, or at least the areas of Yemen they control. And that's exactly what they're doing right now, because they're not just Iran's proxies, they've got their own political agenda, and they know that these Israeli strikes tonight are far more complex to carry out than those on Lebanon, for instance, given the distance and given the difficulty of the terrain in this southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, where American and Israeli intelligence are less competent. So this increases the Houthis' ability to cause trouble and may even enable them tomorrow, maybe, to ask the US to recognize them as the legitimate authority in Yemen.
Bastien, thank you very much. Bastien Bourri there over in Dubai. Well, the US military carried out strikes on the Houthis earlier this week. US CENTCOM said it had hit a missile storage site and a command and control centre. It's trying to disrupt and degrade the Houthis' operations. Well, our senior US correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, joins us now from Washington, D.C. Well, Mike, can we expect any imminent action from the US to support these strikes by Israel tonight?
I think we've got to separate the two issues a little bit, Laura, though they're certainly connected. The U.S. is fighting the same war against the Houthis, but there are different reasons involved sometimes for the U.S.'s action with regards to the Houthis against Yemen. The United States saying that it struck Yemen after repeated attacks again against American vessels operating in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. We've seen hundreds of these attacks against U.S. ships and other countries' vessels and merchants over the course of the Israel-Hamas war. The Houthis said they attempted an attack on the USS Harry S. Truman in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden area earlier on Sunday before the U.S. wound up replying. That was an incident in which the Houthis claimed they shot down an F-18 jet in which 2 American pilots are injured. The U.S. said that the incident was as a result of friendly fire. Nevertheless, the U.S. is tying that incident to the Houthis' attacks against U.S. interests and not necessarily Israel specifically. To that end, however, yeah, I think we can expect that if the U.S. sees a need to have Israel's back here, if the Israel Houthi front continues to heat up, I think we will see some level of U.S. involvement beyond coordination, but that depends on so many different factors right now, and it's important to separate those two fronts, which I just described a moment ago.
And there is a lot of anticipation about whether Israel and the US, particularly the incoming Trump administration, will work together to attack the head of the snake, if you like, the Houthis' patrons in Tehran. Any sign of what we can expect on that?
Well, yeah, there are some signs, and it looks like the Biden administration very belatedly is figuring out here that maybe they didn't handle this thing the right way. Joe Biden reportedly, here in the waning weeks of his administration, is trying to regroup some American assets in terms of how they apply regionally. You know, America tends to look at things in regions, but what you really have is Iran, China, North Korea, and Russia acting together in so many different ways right now against Russian interests, or against American and Western interests. And those are very, very disparate countries geographically. And the Biden administration has ordered military and intelligence services to kind of rethink the way they're grouping these countries together to try to formulate some sort of a plan in case it's needed. Now, whether the Trump administration adopts that same approach or not, I don't think the Trump administration has adopted many of the Biden admin's policies and thinking on really any matters whatsoever. They might disregard them out of spite more than anything. But the Biden admin is at least thinking in that direction. However, Biden has been incredibly risk averse when it comes to actions in the Middle East. It's always been diplomacy, first, second, third, and fourth, and sometimes 10th. And so it would take an immense amount of pressure and an immense amount of violence in the Middle East vis-a-vis Israel and Iran to really drag Biden into war here or into further action in the closing days and weeks of his administration, at least in my humble opinion.
Mike, thanks very much indeed. Mike Wagenheim there. Doron Avital is with me. And Doron, there are reports of a debate, a dispute, if you like, between the head of the Mossad and the Israeli Prime Minister about whether or not they should not bother with the Houthis and they should just go right ahead and attack Iran.
Yeah, I mean, this is what runs underneath. It's not conclusive, but the position of the head of the Mossad is that we should attack Iran. But as was prescribed here very nicely, I mean, the Houthis are independent in some sense. It's a proxy, it's got the delivery of the weaponry and the flow of money and everything from the Iranians, but still, they have their independent policies. I'm not sure in the times until Trump is inaugurated, this would be the best move from the perspective of Israel. If we have concrete...
It shouldn't be right, it wouldn't be right to do it before
to
Trump
attack Iran. I mean, if we have concrete objectives that you can achieve in such an attack, in sync with the U.S. administration, we should do it. But if some people think that this is an opportunity to attack the nuclear infrastructure in this context, in this time, before Trump enters, it's a question of how many weeks, a few weeks. I don't think it will be the smartest move. We have to wear them down, degrade their capacities, gather the intelligence, work with the Houthis I'm talking, gather the coalition, and devise some strategy. Because I don't think anybody think now about some ground military campaign in Yemen. This would be too much to ask, but to degrade their capabilities, to wear them down up to a point, that's what would be the strategy right now, to open the waterways and to see that they don't attack Israel.
Yeah, I just want to quickly note that also what the former spokesperson for the Houthi said in his interview, that they don't expect the international coalition to be the ones who completely destroy the Houthis, but they need to provide the support to Yemeni ground forces, the government forces led by, supported by Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who are currently engaged with the Houthis in southern Yemen, and they're actually gaining some advances. That is also an interesting development to follow in Yemen.
In many respects, we have to think about it in the campaign we had in Lebanon. It was a careful campaign in many respects, this distinction between Lebanese infrastructure and Hezbollah. And in the end, we saw the domino effect in Syria. So if we succeed to really degrade their capabilities and have the opposition strengthen its forces, maybe in the end there would be some outcome that could be the fall of the Houthis, but not another Iraqi invasion into the Houthis. This is a desert terrain. They are scattered there. This is 70% of Yemen is under their control.
It would be Afghanistan on steroids, wouldn't
exactly.
it? Yeah. All right, Doron, Ariel, thank you very much.
Another option on the table right now.
Yeah, we're going to take a short break. OK, when we come back, sectarian tensions flaring in Syria following the ousting of Bashar al-Assad. We'll have more on that for you next. Stay with us.
It started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olam app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Welcome back. There are some signs that sectarian tensions are flaring in parts of Syria following the ousting of the dictator Bashar al-Assad earlier this month. The new government has launched a crackdown after 14 police officers were killed in Tartus, an area historically aligned with the former regime. It was the worst violence since Assad fled the country. Our Alex Schloss has the story.
Protests erupted in Syria after a video of an attack on an Alawite shrine in Aleppo circulated online. While the demonstrations originated in the heartland of deposed Syrian ruler Bashar al-Assad's Alawite minority in the coastal cities of Tartus and Latakia, they soon spread.
We want all Syria to know that the Alawites in Kardaha are an essential part of this society and its fabric. We're not outsiders, we are the people of this area. We extend our hand to anyone who wants to build a new Syria free from injustice, discrimination, and inequality. We want social justice and the respect of people and their rights.
In the central city of Homs, a large crowd was seen fleeing gunfire. The source of that fire has not yet been identified. This comes just a day after hundreds protested in Damascus against the torching of a Christmas tree.
Our position is that of monitoring what may happen in order to judge if these factions that came, the HTS and the groups that are ruling now in Syria, are serious about creating a civil Syrian society where all its citizens have the opportunity to live freely, and especially its Christian citizens. So we are waiting.
Alongside the Alawite protest movement, 14 Syrian police officers were killed in an ambush by forces loyal to the ousted Assad government in the Tartus governorate. Syria's new interior minister, Mohammed Abdulrahman, is vowing to, quote, crack down on anyone who dares to undermine Syria's security or endanger the lives of its citizens.
There is no need for the events that happened in Tartus, and the HTS must hit those who went out in protests with an iron fist. Why are they going out and causing all this chaos? By God's will, there will be no civil war. All those were remnants of the previous regime.
Syria's new Islamist rulers have sought to assure religious and ethnic minorities that their rights will be upheld. But until proven capable of doing so, these protests will just be the latest in the string of security challenges facing the new administration that came to power just 2 weeks ago.
Well, joining us now, Omar Al-Muqdad is a Syrian journalist and filmmaker. Thank you very much for being with us, Omar. So there is a sense, isn't there, that as the euphoria about overthrowing the dictator Assad kind of simmers down, there is a concern that we're seeing some sectarian tensions flare. Do you agree with that, and how serious is it?
Well, thank you very much. In fact, that was expected all along. I mean, we're still talking about thousands of Assad regime loyalists still lose, those who committed crimes against Syrian people. And now they found out that the justice reached their doors, and they are acting violently in some cases. And Iran also is fueling the sectarianism in Syria. And we heard many Iranian officials using this sectarian language while talking to the Syrian people. And actually, the transitional administration is now filing a complaint against Iran, the United Nations. But we're now talking about thousands of Assad regime loyalists who wants a general amnesty in exchange of dropping down their weapons, which unfortunately for them is not going to happen. Anybody who's engulfed in the Syrian blood must be held accountable, and they must know that there will be consequences for their actions. The transitional administration has demonstrated a high level of discipline and responsibility in dealing with these events. In fact, they imposed curfew in some of these areas, and for many of Assad regime generals and leaders, they still chase them down. Today, I heard that they hunt down the Saidnaya military prison general, and the guy who was responsible about torturing and killing thousands of Syrians. These events is not going to end unless
he's been arrested.
Yes, he's been arrested today. There was images of him circulating the internet.
Okay, so I mean, what is the risk, though, Omar, that the pendulum swings too far the other way, and instead of having a kind of a reconciliation and accountability process that is clearly needed after so many people suffered under the Assad regime, what is the risk of it going too far the other way, and people will be seeking retribution and punishing, communities like the Alawite communities for what Assad did?
Well, in fact, there was the transitional administration has already issued a general amnesty for anybody who dropped down its arms and comes to their points and locations and fix its status. They're going to be just released, to just go home. But for those who were directly involved or commanding crimes against Syrian people, it's hard to give them any general amnesty, because we're talking here about individual rights, and the families of the victims, if they're going to forgive or not. That must be discussed in a courtroom. Not the state itself can't do much for that. But for the soldiers, and we're talking here about the soldier level, and anybody who is just doing his military service, there's no problem with that at all. Actually, many of them, one of the generals of the Republican Guards actually has fixed his status with the transitional government, and he's now in his house. Nobody is actually chasing him. But many of Assad regime loyalists are those who engage directly in crimes. They know that
there will be accountability.
Accountability. So this is why they are now trying to fuel the situation in these areas, but thank God it is still under control.
There's another concern, Omar, and that is that the new government is quite extreme. Today, another member was named. This is Anas Khattab. He's to be the head of the General Intelligence Agency. And he was, like Jolani, he was also on a US wanted list for terrorists. I mean, is this new government too extreme?
Well, in fact, yes, some of the background of these dudes is conservative or extreme, but for many Syrians right now, we're just laying down and waiting this time to end until the conference for the National Assembly happen in Damascus, and then after that, there's going to be the principal paper produced by this National Assembly, and to write the Syrian constitution is going to be elections. And most of these names won't be there. But this is a de facto policy now we're talking here, because these are the guys who entered Damascus, and they are the ones now responsible about hold the country together and making sure that the country won't engulf in a chaos and like what Assad regime really wanted all along. Because if you look at how Bashar Assad left Syria, he wanted the country to get involved to fall to pieces. But unfortunately for him, that didn't happen. Thanks for the new administration that's now running the things with with more caution, and they are very careful in dealing with this stuff right now.
Omar, great to talk to you as always. Thank you very much indeed, Omar Al-Muqdad there.
Thank you.
Well, meanwhile, fighting continues in the northeast of Syria between the US-backed Kurdish-led Syrian Defence Forces and Turkish-backed forces. Earlier this week, Turkey's President Erdogan warned that he would bury the Kurdish militia if they didn't lay down their arms. We're joined now by Syrian reporter Badakan Ahmad. So, Badakan, there seems to be a bit of a back and forth between the Kurdish and the Turkish-backed forces over places like Manbij, Koban. Can you just explain to us what is happening on the ground right now?
What's going on the ground now? It's like daily fights, daily battles between the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Turkish-backed factions. It's the Syrian National Army, which called the Syrian National Army. The clashes now, they are more between more or less in the Minbij countryside, in the southern countryside, and specifically around Tishrin Dam on Euphrates River. So Turkey has a goal to take control or to occupy more territories in northeastern Syria that was threatening Kobane a while ago, and now it's threatening other places, and now it's threatening all the Kurdish people. The Turkish government, they don't have a problem with the protection forces or with the SDF. It's their problem. It's more with the Kurdish people there. So the opinion of Syrian Democratic Forces was clear that they will not put their weapons down, because until they guarantee a new government that protects the rights of Kurdish people, of Christian, of Alawitas, of Druze, and Yazidis and other minorities in Syria. And we can see now in many different social medias from Alawitas community and Druze, they want to live in the territory of Syrian Democratic Forces, because we never had this experience that we can see today in Tartus and Latakia. Today I have seen some footage from HTS soldiers, how they torture some people. They could be soldiers too. They could be some members of al-Assad too. But what I have seen, that it's reminding me what Bashar Assad was doing in his government, what his army was doing against the people.
The reprisals and the personal attacks. Well, I want to ask you about that, Badekan, because supporters of the new government in Syria say you have to give them a chance. They're taking over after 50 years of dictatorship. But are you worried that these sectarian tensions will flare up and we could see worse to come?
Yeah, because the problem that now Ahmad al-Shara, he cannot control his factions. He cannot control. He has different factions with different minds, with different mentalities. We have seen a few days ago they have burned a Christmas tree in Hama. We have seen many different demonstrations, even in my territory and in other places. Now the minorities, I can feel it. The minorities feel with danger in Syria. They cannot feel safe, and this is the new government. This is the temporary government that they need to do their best for build the next steps. But if they are doing this now, so what they can do when they have more control in Syria. So the people are worried for face another government that maybe was worse than al-Assad. So what we need that Ahmad al-Shara, he has to do some clear steps that to protect the Kurds, the Druze, the Alawitas,
the minorities in Syria.
The minorities in Syria,
All right, Badekan, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much. Great to talk to you. Badekan Ahmad there.
Thank you.
And Doron Avital is with me in the studio. And it hasn't been in the headlines so much, but of course, the IDF is still positioned at the top of the Helmond mountain with that very strategic position over Syria. Do you foresee any problems ahead with the new government in Damascus over that issue?
I think I would dare to predict what would happen to Syria, but we have to take those defensive measures, and we took them, and we declared that they are defensive measures. And Hermon, the Mount Hermon, the peak of the Syrian peak, is one of those defensive measures. And we'll have to see how it unfolds. The constitution will be an interesting milestone to see what kind of constitution Giuliani would provide the system and whether he would succeed. One of the greatest tests is always to see what's going on with the Christian minorities, both in Lebanon and Syria, because lately there were many Christians have left, and it's an indication that the forces.
Well, we've seen the Christian communities in Lebanon and Iraq completely decimated in recent years.
So, of course, if it doesn't go the path of a united civil society, whatever, a Syrian society, then, and it would go on the path of a new civil war, would be a place for Iran to intervene again. And when there are civil wars, when there was a civil war in Lebanon in the 80s, the Syrian forces entered Lebanon, and the civil war continues. The Iranian enter. So we have to see.
Profit from the chaos.
Exactly. Whenever there's a chaos, so we have to be very protective in terms of protecting our interest. No interest in intervening. but be very clear and very decisive on our borders.
Okay, Doran, thank you. Now, Hamas claims it is having difficulty compiling a list of living hostages for Israel. That's according to one of the group's senior officials who's quoted today in a Qatari newspaper. The latest round of talks between an Israeli and a Hamas delegation, indirect talks, took place in Doha earlier this week. 100 hostages do remain in Gaza. Let's get the latest with our Balih Sladin, who joins us now from Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. And Balih, what more do we know at this stage?
Yes, just right before we talk about what are we hearing about the latest regarding the negotiations, we just need to mention the meeting, the very heated meeting, I should say, at the residence of the President of Israel, Yitzhak Herzog, that just ended. And there was a heated debate, actually, between one of the fathers of a hostage, Danny Elgart, that said that everyone is getting us into this political issue that we are not part of. He is telling the president that the fact that the families are demanding ceasefire agreements and the return of the hostages, the loved ones, doesn't mean that they are raising up the price, quote unquote, as some of the people inside the government and also, of course, people on the street in Israel are saying. And the president is, of course, responding to that and saying that he is taking his part in pressuring the government and all parties to reach that agreement. This is happening on the second day of the Hanukkah. There was a candle lighting, at the president's residence, and this gathering is happening right now. And as I said, just ended. That was very important for the president to show his support, of course, for the families, because he's getting lots of criticism that he's not doing enough in order to bring back the hostages. Now, today we've heard also some Hamas sources responding actually to what the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday has said regarding the fact that Hamas still not giving the list of alive hostages, something that Israel has been demanding for months now. They are saying in Hamas that we don't refuse to give the list of the alive hostages. We just find it hard to find them actually inside the Gaza Strip, because many of them are in the hands of other Palestinian fractions, not only in Hamas's fraction. And this communication, while there is a war in Gaza, is making difficult for us to find them. I think that the Israeli side is not convinced by that, and they are saying that we actually cannot trust Hamas, that once we actually sign that ceasefire agreement, they would actually give us that list that we have been demanding.
All right, Balih, thank you very much indeed. Balih Sladin there. And Doron, it's another devastating landmark, isn't it? Families marking Hanukkah for a second year with their loved ones held in the Hamas dungeons.
Yeah, last week there was more optimism in the air, now more optimism in the air, now less optimism. The two main issues, for example, the humanitarian deal was supposed to be a stepping stone all the way to prolong a ceasefire, maybe let's call it the end of the war, but then it's not clear that this coalition is willing to provide such a proclamation. So this is one problem. The other problem is really there's a chaos in Gaza. So really to come out with the list, it's not an issue. I wouldn't undermine the argument here of the Hamas. I'm sure our intelligence people know better. What do they know about?
You think they're playing for time, or what?
Maybe they play for time, but I wouldn't. This is an issue. There's a huge chaos. There's criminal gangs there. There's the Islamic Jihad. Some of the people are with Hamas. This chaos, it's an issue. I wouldn't undermine it. I'm sure our intelligence people, the people that are responsible for the issue of the hostages, know better than me what we know, where are the people, who is alive, who is dead, and so on. And they can evaluate this claim of Hamas, whether they need a few days of ceasefire in order to collect the data. I'm not sure. I wouldn't come with a conclusion here. But I think the main issue is the day after in Gaza. What do we want to do with Gaza? Because the fact that we can intervene militarily forever, I mean, of course, we do it in the West Bank. The question, who runs Gaza? And this is an issue that
civilian infrastructure, the
this
schools,
is an issue
the hospitals,
exactly
that
the government doesn't want to tackle, and this is an issue, and it clouds the whole thing.
Do you think they're waiting for?
They wait for Trump for sure. I think it's part of the issue. Yeah, but the time runs out on our hostages. So it's a big issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say that the government doesn't want to declare an end to the war, what do you mean by that exactly?
I mean, there was the claims of Israel Katz, the Minister of Defense, says we'll always have a military rule. What does it mean, a military rule? It doesn't mean a military regime in Gaza, because a military regime means that you are the occupying forces. You mean that you are also responsible for the civil daily life of the Gazans. But this is not what he says. So if it means a military intervention, we intervene in the West Bank whenever we need, even in 8 territories. But this means that the Palestinian Authority is part of the solution or the resolution for the day after in Gaza. This government, it's hard for her even to pronounce Palestinian Authority. No cent would enter Gaza from Arab countries without the Palestinian Authority involvement. So this is where the puzzle is, and I think everybody waits to see what Trump says when he enters.
Okay, Doron, great to talk to you. Thank you very much, Doron Avitalda. The Taliban has warned of retaliation after Pakistan carried out a series of airstrikes on its territory. Pakistan says it was targeting the Afghan hideouts of the Pakistani Taliban, also known as the TTP. It was the first cross-border strikes since March and comes amid a spate of attacks by the Pakistani group. Well, joining us now from Kabul, journalist Shakib Nazari. Good to see you, Shakib. How much damage did these Pakistani strikes cause in Afghanistan?
First of all, let me just say that these strikes were targeted the civilians, because according to the authorities, I mean about the Taliban authorities, that yes, they shared the details. There were 46 people has been killed in this airstrike, and most of them are women and children. But in today's, even the Taliban took in a presidential palace, they just mentioned one thing about this, that on the targeting civilians, there were some refugees, and I think these refugees were from the Waziristan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, that they have been immigrants from Pakistan to Afghanistan. And also there are most of the village has been destroyed, and people has been transported and left their households to another place to find a good life.
These were Afghan civilians who had sought refuge in Pakistan, and of course Pakistan recently kicked them all back into Afghanistan. Those were the victims of these airstrikes, you're saying?
It's not something like that, because Afghanistan has been not approved the Durham line since I can say about like 1980 till now. Due to that, most of the people who are living on the both sides of the Durham line, they call themselves Afghans. But according to the Pakistani, that they are just the illegal immigrants from Afghanistan, and they must be pushed back to Afghanistan. And it's not the common case in Afghanistan. It has been happened several times during the Taliban regime. And on the recent statements that has been published by the Ministry of Defense of Taliban, they just labeled Pakistani as a violation of the Afghanistan airspace, and they just stated that such actions will not be something like unanswered, and they are just waiting for the diplomatic ways and negotiation to solve such problems in the further years, or maybe they will face another war between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that won't be happening, because on the past 20 years, Afghanistan ex-government also has the same things with the Pakistan, and Pakistan always just denied the presence of Taliban on their soil.
Shakib, thank you very much indeed for explaining that to us. Shakib Nazari there over in Kabul. Now, after the dark years under the Assad regime, laughter is returning to Syria, where people once lived in fear of being jailed or killed for saying the wrong thing. There's now a new generation of comedians picking up the microphone. Our Joe Brown has the story.
What do you call a group of comedians performing freely for the first time since the fall of a decades-long dictatorial regime without worry of repercussions for their jokes?
From now on, never again fear. After the fall of Bashar al-Assad, nothing can scare us anymore.
While Syria's comedy scene has been thriving for a long time, its censorship has been no joke. Bashar al-Assad's regime banned comedians from joking about certain topics, including elections, the economy, and of course, Assad himself. But now, with new leadership in the country, comedians are feeling a weight off their shoulders, allowing them to put more emphasis on material that only 1 month ago could have led to a heavy prison sentence. And it's not just comedians who are feeling the calm, but the audience too.
The last show I attended had restrictions, but today's show is different. There were no restrictions. They were able to speak freely without fear of accountability, and we no longer go to bed afraid. Today, we feel much more at ease.
Whilst many questions remain as to how Ahmed al-Sharaa will govern, Syria's funny men and women have no fear.
I believe some form of understanding will emerge, because you can't have a revolution that spanned 13 years and 30 or 40 years of struggle before that, only to end up with the authorities that would dictate what we can and cannot say. They must learn to get used to freedom of speech and listen to us.
The Syrian people have been through a lot in recent years, but the old saying holds true: the best medicine is laughter.
Nice to see some smiles in Syria. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Middle East Now. Many thanks indeed for watching. Do so with us. Benita Levin is up next with the rundown. But from me and the team, Hanukkah Sameach. Have a peaceful weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
It started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for joining us. Israel vowed to respond to the recent Houthi ballistic missile and drone attacks on the country, and today it did just that, striking terror targets in Yemen used to smuggle Iranian weapons into the region. The Iranian-backed group had launched several attacks on Israeli cities just this week, and in recent hours, the Israeli Air Force responded, targeting Sana'a International Airport, which is controlled by the Houthis, the port city of Hodeidah, and other strategic sites. All while Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi was delivering a speech outlining how their recent attacks out of Yemen had broken Israel's defensive superiority. He also reiterated they will not stop their operations in support of the Palestinian people. Israel making it clear it will stop the Houthi attacks on the country and on international shipping. Benjamin Netanyahu sharing this message a short while ago on the second night of the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. Take a listen.
We are lighting a second candle of Hanukkah tonight. We are in the war of rebirth, the generation of the Maccabees of our time. The Air Force today attacked targets of the Houthi terrorist organization in Yemen, both on the coastline and in Sana'a. We are determined to cut off this terrorist arm of Iran's evil axis. We will persist in this until we complete the task.
Now it's the fourth time Israel has conducted retaliatory strikes on the Houthis in Yemen during this war, a war started by Hamas on the 7th of October. So how worried should Houthi leaders be, given that Israel has in recent months eliminated Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah, Hamas leaders Ismail Haniyeh and Yahya Sinwar, and many other senior terror members? Well, Defense Minister Israel Katz is vowing to hunt down all Houthi leaders.
We witnessed a precise operation by the Israeli Air Force, targeting strategic Houthi sites in Yemen, including an airport and a port. As we said, whoever harms Israel, we will harm them. We will hunt down all Houthi leaders and strike them, just as we have done in other places. No one will be able to escape Israel's long arm. We will target them to eliminate threats to the state of Israel.
So for more insight into these major developments across the region, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Naria, former Deputy Head of Assessment in the Israeli Military Intelligence and a former Foreign Policy Advisor to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Thank you both so much for being here. So Israeli jets are already back home. It's a developing situation. Much progress, many developments. Ariel, I'm going to start with you as we get more and more updates about exactly what in fact transpired across the skies of Yemen in recent hours on this day.
Yeah, we're talking about a significant airstrike, including 25 fighter jets, as well as other intelligence jets. Multiple sites targeted: the Sana'a International Airport, the port of Hodeidah, and other electric power stations in the area. This appears to be a continuous strategy by Israel to now move to critical infrastructure belonging to the Houthis. Now, what was interesting is that this the multiple waves of airstrikes coincided with the speech delivered, recorded speech, I should say, by Houthi leader Abdel Malik al-Houthi, claiming that Israeli airstrikes on Yemen will not deter them, and the ongoing aggression, as he called it, on their sites will not deter them from continuing their support for Gaza. It's as if this speech was immediately responding to the ongoing airstrikes in the country. According to Houthi El Masira TV, at least four people were killed in these airstrikes, 3 in the international airport in Sana'a, 1 in the port of Hodeidah, 16 people injured, and 3 are currently considered missing.
Certainly a developing situation, and obviously the region waiting to see exactly what kind of extent to the damage, what kind of capabilities have been destroyed. It's an ongoing situation. But Jacques, the Houthis, of course, a central part of the Iranian axis of evil. Your assessment?
If you've just paid attention to the declaration by the IDF spokesman, he said very clearly that the Houthis are a terror organization, that in fact he wanted to stress the fact that it did not respond directly from Iran. It did not receive instructions from Iran. It had its own decision-making and its own behavior. So, I mean, although the Iranians are supplying weapons, technologies, and all the rest, it doesn't mean that the Iranians are the ones that are deciding what to do with the Houthis. And the Houthis are not responding to that. This is one thing. Second, according to the targets that Israel has chosen, so these are targets of infrastructure. What sort of infrastructure does Yemen has? This is it's an underdeveloped country, and it's not the same as you hit. Infrastructure in a developed country that immediately you can feel the harm, and you feel that the people would immediately react. Here, there's no such thing. I mean, the 2 power stations and two ports. I mean, they were just experiencing famine there for a long time, and this was one of the reasons why the U.S. just pressed the Saudis to stop the war and reach a ceasefire with the Houthis after 5 years, where the Houthis were bombing day after day, and not with 25 fighter jets, but with a whole air force, and did not succeed in subduing it. What do I want to say, in fact? I say that we have to prove to the Houthis that we are present, that we will not accept a situation where we're now dripping the missiles 1 per day or 2 per day, whatever. This is not acceptable. And for each of these attempts, there's a price to pay. But the price to pay doesn't mean that we will be able to convince the Houthis to stop the war. Because we had, if we look at the experience of the Houthis versus Saudi Arabia, for 5 years, they tried, together with the Minorities, to subdue them, and they did not succeed. So, I mean, the big question is, if we keep on doing what we are doing right now, I doubt it very much that we will succeed in convincing the Houthis to stop. What we have to do is to begin a situation where the U.S., with the Great Britain and other powers are together with Israel, and this because, I mean, after all, they are endangering the 20% of the commerce. I mean, this is the shipping there, and it has to be a concerted effort by the U.S., Great Britain, Israel, and other powers. Emiratis, for instance, Egyptians, for instance, are suffering at the Suez Canal, and the Saudis, of course. And this would maybe create a situation where the Houthis will think twice before they're sending another missile towards Israel.
Well, we hope and we wait and we see. In the meanwhile, Ariel, the director of the World Health Organization, talking about the famine in Yemen, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, was at the Sana'a airport at the time of these strikes. Tell us more. What is he saying? Yeah,
this in a tweet sharing the head of the World Health Organization that he was just about to board a plane in the Sana'a International Airport. They were there to discuss the humanitarian situation and also the release of hostages held by who other than the Houthis. As Israeli strikes began, they were there. In fact, he was saying that just a few meters from where we were, he's saying the runway was damaged, saying they're all safe, him and his team, and they will need to wait for the damage at the airport to be repaired before they can leave. The same wave of airstrikes on the airport led to the death of 3 people, as I mentioned earlier, and the head of the World Health Organization was there at the time.
And tweeting about what he saw and he experienced. I want your take, Jacques, on what we heard a little bit earlier in the broadcast, and that is Israel's defense minister saying, Houthi leaders, beware. We've come after other leaders of terror groups, and Israel is not shy to try and do it again. But the intelligence to target Houthi leaders must be somewhat more complicated than those living closer by to Israel's borders.
Allow me to have some reserve concerning the declarations of our Minister of Defense. And Yemen was never on the focus of our attention as a military, as an intelligence gathering. And I mean, this was too far for us. We were specialized in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, I mean, Jordan and certainly Egypt. These are the countries that surround Israel and that count for Israel. Yemen was something that we were not even aware that this might begin. And when the first missiles were sent by the Houthis, everybody asked, who are the Houthis? Who the hell is the Houthis? And so this means that we have to concentrate on a massive intelligence gathering that will take time. It's not something that you build in 2 days. It takes time. I believe that at the end of the day, we will be able to target some of them. Maybe if we get lucky, we get some very good information, very good intelligence that will guide us to go there. But I mean, I would like to go back to the geostrategic situation in the area. We have potentially two allies that are not Arabs. It's the Eritrea and Ethiopia. I mean, Ethiopia with our historical ties, and together with in Eritrea, where most of the people have Hebrew names. So, I mean, we might be in a situation where we could rather shorten the distance between Israel and Yemen. Instead of having 2,000 kilometers to cross in order to get there, maybe we could arrange a situation where we would fly the fighter jets from shorter distances, which would mean that we would have more the possibilities of attacking and reducing the Houthis. And this is something that we have to think about, and I believe that our leaders maybe are right now concentrating on this option also.
Fascinating dynamics, fascinating developments indeed. And as you say, many are asking who exactly are the Houthis. So gentlemen, stay with us, because the Houthis are the last terror arm of Iran's extensive axis of evil. They have launched more than 300 projectiles at Israel since the 7th of October. And right now, the region's still waiting to find out exactly how successful this latest Israeli retaliatory strike on the Houthis has been, as we've been discussing. Now, some have been suggesting it's time for Israel to target Iran directly, the head of the octopus, so to speak. Our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oberman, spoke to the former international spokesman for the Houthis, Ali al-Bukhaiti, just a day ago. So let's take a listen.
علي البخيتي الناطق السابق للحوثيين، السلام عليكم ومرحبا بك.
أهلا وسهلا.
الهجمات من قبل الحوثيين ضد إسرائيل أصبحت حدثا يوميا. كيف تنظر التطورات الأخيرة في الصراع بين إسرائيل والحوثيين؟
باعتقادي أن الحوثيين سيستمرون في استهداف إسرائيل، لأن هذا يزيد من شعبيتهم في الوطن العربي بل وفي العالم الإسلامي، ويجدون أنهم يعني يلقون مدحا كثيرا من هذه الأوساط، بل حتى في بعض الأوساط الغربية اليسارية وغيرها، وهم بحاجة لمثل هذا الإطراء نتيجة لفشلهم في إدارة أحوال المواطنين في الداخل.
تفاجأت لما شفت التصعيد الأخير في الهجمات المتبادلة بين إسرائيل والحوثيين؟
لم يفاجئني التصعيد الأخير. أنا تحدثت أكثر من مرة لوسائل إعلام إسرائيلية أن الحوثيين مع مرور الوقت سيزيدون التكنولوجيا ومدى ودقة صواريخهم، وأنهم سيتلقون مساعدات من إيران ومن روسيا ومن كوريا الشمالية وكل أعداء الولايات المتحدة وإسرائيل. سيجدون الحوثيين فرصة للانتقام من الولايات المتحدة ومن إسرائيل كذلك.
حسب معرفتك، ما مدى جدية مساعدة إيران للحوثيين، وهل هذا الدعم مستمر؟
نعم، سيستمر الدعم الإيراني للحوثيين وبقوة، وبالأخص بعد أن ترك حزب الله المعركة، حماس في أضعف أوقاتها، نظام بشار الأسد سقط، لم يعد لدى إيران حليف قوي يمكن أن تضغط به على الولايات المتحدة وعلى إسرائيل إلا الحوثيين، وبالتالي سيتوجه أغلب الدعم الإيراني إلى الحوثيين، وهذا الدعم سيصب في تل أبيب عبر صواريخ ومسيرات. في
أي أسلوب بيجي هذا الدعم للحوثيين؟
الدعم يأتي على الأغلب تكنولوجيا، خبراء في تصنيع الصواريخ، طائرات بدون طيار، كذلك أموال هائلة تصب للحوثيين في هذا القطاع العسكري تحديدا.
والمساعدة تيجي عبر البحر؟
نعم، السواحل اليمنية ممتدة لآلاف الكيلومترات ولا أحد يستطيع السيطرة عليها، ومن السهولة لإيران أن توصل مساعداتها، بل أن إيران تدخل سفراءها وتعيدهم إلى إيران عبر هذه الموانئ.
الأستاذ البخيتي، ما هي الحلول الممكنة لتمتلك إسرائيل لإنهاء العمليات ضد أراضيها؟
باعتقادي أن الحوثيين ليسوا مشكلة لإسرائيل فقط، الحوثيين مشكلة أولا لنا نحن كيمنيين، مشكلة للإقليم العربي، السعودية والإمارات وباقي دول الخليج، مشكلة كذلك للعالم، وبالتالي يجب أن يكون هناك تحالف دولي لإسقاط سلطة الحوثيين في صنعاء، وليس فقط لتأمين الملاحة البحرية. يجب أن يكون هناك تحالف مشابه للتحالف الذي قضى على داعش والقاعدة في العراق. السعودية والدول العربية وكذلك اليمنيين وبصريح العبارة لن ينخرطوا في تحالف الهدف من تأمين الملاحة الإسرائيلية، لكن الأطراف اليمنية والدول العربية ستنخرط في تحالف دولي يكون الهدف من إسقاط سلطة الحوثيين في صنعاء.
بس بالإضافة للتحالف اللي تحكي عنها، أنت دائما بتقول إنه مشكلة جذرية تلزم حل جذري. ما هو الحل الجذري المطلوب حسب رأيك لإسقاط حكم الحوثيين في اليمن؟
الحل الجذري هو وجود هذا التحالف الدولي الذي تحدثت عنه. هذا التحالف الدولي بالتعاون مع القوات الحكومية اليمنية، بالتعاون كذلك مع السعودية والإمارات، يمكن لهذه القوات اليمنية أن تتحرك على الأرض ويكون هناك غطاء جوي من التحالف الدولي وكذلك من الدول العربية، وسيسقط الحوثيين سريعا. علينا أن لا ننسى أن الولايات المتحدة وبريطانيا والدول الأوروبية هي التي منعت عملية تحرير الحديدة والساحل اليمني في 2018 تحت مسميات إنسانية. الآن هذه الدول باتت تدفع الثمن وهي نفسها تستهدف الحديدة وتستهدف الكثير من المناطق في صنعاء.
مثير للاهتمام. الأستاذ البخيتي، ما هو الموقف السعودي المطلوب حسب رأيك لما الحوثيين يهددوا بهجمات ضد مواقع أمريكية أبصر وين ما بتكون أيضا في المملكة السعودية؟
السعودية من وجهة نظري هي تريد إسقاط سلطة الحوثيين في صنعاء، لكنها لن تنخرط في تحالف دولي لحماية الملاحة البحرية لأنها تخشى أن يقوم الحوثيين بالانتقام منها. لكن متى ما وجدت الولايات المتحدة أن هناك جدية من الولايات المتحدة والعالم لإنشاء تحالف دولي يهدف إلى إسقاط سلطة الحوثيين في صنعاء، المملكة العربية السعودية ستنخرط في هذا التحالف. السعودية تشعر بالقلق من وجود الحوثيين وهي أكثر دولة تدفع الثمن.
كلام واضح. علي البخيتي، الناطق السابق للحوثيين، شكرا جزيلا على حضرتك معنا.
العفو، شكرا.
The former international spokesman for the Houthis, Ali al-Bukhaiti, speaking to our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran, just a day ago in Arabic, and now he's in studio in English. And I'd love your takeaways because there were so many fascinating insights that we heard, much of what we were discussing just a short while ago, including the financial backing that the Houthis have thanks to Iran, and obviously the implications for the whole Arab region, including Saudi Arabia. Your main takeaways out of that interview?
Yeah, the fact that with all the other remaining proxies kind of out of the field, the Houthis emerging as the main active, significant proxy by Iran, and they're putting all their weight behind the Houthis in Yemen. But what really struck out from this interview with Mr. Bukhaiti, not the first time he's spoken to us here at I-24 News, is that not only are the Houthis, they're not only a problem for Israel, not just for the region, but for the world, and this requires an international coalition, but this coalition should aim to support the Yemeni government forces operating on the ground as air support. You need boots on the ground in order to overthrow the Houthis, the Houthi control in the capital Sana'a, in the Yemeni coast. And I took that as striking because we're talking, conversations with people I've had in the Gulf. They say we need to get the region back in play. The United States needs to show that it's serious. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the Yemeni people themselves who are going to lead the forefront in overthrowing, or the attempt to overthrow, the Houthis. They need regional, international support. And in terms of the capabilities, it is definitely in the ability of all those international actors to provide them with that support. And I will just note, there is currently an ongoing advance of those government forces from the southern Yemen. That is also an important front to keep on watching in these coming days and weeks.
Dr. Jacques Neria, you were nodding in agreement in part of that interview. Your takeaways, you were talking just a short while ago about the fact that this is a problem for the international arena, not just Israel.
Definitely so. And basically, I mean, I quite agree with Ariel about how, and of course about from the declarations of the Houthi spokesman, I mean, in the past.
Former spokesperson, he doesn't want to be connected to the
one. By the way, allow me to congratulate you for your Arabic. This is, I mean, this is quite remarkable. Anyway, I mean, the thing is that without the boots on the ground, there's no way that you can eradicate the Houthis. And the only way to do it is through a concerted effort by the Yemeni loyal government, the Emiratis who are present there, and the Saudis on the other hand. So by moving from both sides, I believe that the Houthis will have finally to make a decision if they have to continue the war or just stop it and just move away and be forgotten in history.
We're going to pick up on this conversation a little bit later on in the show, but right now, stay with us. We want to turn to Hamas. The terror group has yet to provide proof of life or a full list of the hostages it's been holding in captivity for 447 days now since the terror group's invasion and mass abduction in southern Israel on the 7th of October. It has reportedly provided a partial list of living hostages to negotiators, but is unable to contact all those holding them captive in Gaza. The Qatari-owned Al Arabi Al Jadid outlet is reporting that Hamas maintains it will be in a better position to provide information once a ceasefire has started. Israeli officials believe Hamas is backtracking and delaying moves towards a deal. 100 hostages are still being held in Gaza, including 7 Americans. Will the pressure out of the US make a difference? So for the latest update, let's go to correspondent Balir Sladin. He joins us from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. So the latest reports, Balir, suggest Hamas is refusing to provide information on the hostages. Also, the suggestion it doesn't know where they all are being held. What is the latest? What are you learning?
Yes, exactly that. That has been Hamas's excuse for months now, that because of the war, they cannot find all the hostages and they cannot contact also the other fractions in Gaza in order to ask about the situation of the hostages. But in Israel, as I understand, over the past few days, sources are saying that we cannot trust that. Maybe Hamas is waiting actually for us to actually sign this agreement, and then they will try to manipulate us with different things and not actually releasing alive hostages, which is the main thing that Israel is demanding, and keeping in their hands actually most of the hostages as a way to pressure Israel to end the war. That has been their main goal since the beginning of the war on October 7th. So that's what the Hamas official is saying today to Al Arabi Al Jadid, a Qatari newspaper, that we're not refusing, we just cannot provide this list. Now, Now, on the other hand, we're saying that there is a concern among families of hostages. Today, just a short while ago, actually, a meeting in the presidential residence in Jerusalem has ended with the families of the hostages. And there has been a concern, an obvious one, about this phased deal. The families are afraid that actually Israel is going for a partial deal that will bring back only some of the hostages, not sure whether all of them or some of them or any of them will be alive or not, or actually they are demanding from the president to put pressure on the government to reach a deal that would bring back all of the hostages all at once in one phase that will end, of course, the war in Gaza with the full withdrawal of the Israeli troops from there. That has been their demand and their concern over the past few days.
Day 2 of the festival of Hanukkah, a festival of miracles. The nation continues waiting for a miracle so that all the hostages can come back home. Thank you so much for now. Correspondent Balir Sladin, live from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. Retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Nerier, so much has been made about the international pressure out of the United States. The hostages include 7 Americans, whether it's the Biden administration, the future Trump administration, the threats, the vows, the promises. What is it going to take?
Unfortunately, I don't believe in miracles. And I don't think that we'll be witnessing a miracle in the coming days because, I mean, positions of both sides have not changed. On the one hand, I mean, Hamas wants a total stop of hostilities, withdrawal of all Israeli troops, and on the other side, Israel says that it's not ready to end the war. And so, if both positions are understandable, but I mean, it means that both positions cannot be bridged and cannot bring a conclusion. And the fact is that each side is accusing the other means that, I mean, we don't have the means right now to overcome the hurdles and to reach a deal. And it will be, unfortunately for all the families and the hostages, and this is a disaster, a personal disaster, of course. I don't believe that there's a way to convince today Hamas to give this list, because Hamas wants the ECs in this list and these hostages. It's a card of survival, because they understand very well that the moment those hostages are not in its hand anymore, so I mean, Israel would be free to attack and to eradicate completely Hamas in Gaza. I mean, I don't think as an idea it can be eradicated, but as an organization, as a structure, military structure, as a civilian structure, and this is the reason where, I mean, we don't find a way to speak and to reach an understanding with Hamas. As simple as that.
Devastating to think that a deal could be imminent, but from your perspective is looking increasingly unlikely. We hope that you are wrong in this particular instance. We certainly hope so. Gentlemen, stay with us. We've got much more to discuss on the security front. Right now, though, a quick break, but when we get back, our coverage continues on The Rundown. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.
Started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Welcome back to The Rundown. Our coverage continues and there are so many security developments across the region. Let's bring you some more updates because fighting continues in central Gaza. The terror threat is still there. The IDF saying an overnight airstrike on a vehicle near the Al-Auda hospital in Nusayrat targeted an Islamic Jihad terrorist cell inside the van. The Palestinian TV channel Al-Quds saying it was a media van and 5 journalists were killed. Israel has repeatedly flagged cases in which terrorists in Gaza work under the cover of journalists. The IDF saying before the strike it had taken numerous steps to mitigate the risk of harming civilians, reiterating it would continue to operate against Hamas and defend Israeli citizens. Well, another development making headlines on this day, this one out of Jerusalem. Itamar Ben-Gvir says he prayed during a visit to the Flashpoint Temple Mount on Thursday morning. The Israeli National Security Minister taking to social media to say he prayed for the safety of the country's soldiers, the speedy return of the hostages, and a total victory. Jews are not officially allowed to pray at the Temple Mount, the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but the Israeli police have been allowing limited prayer at times. The police, of course, fall under Ben-Gvir's ministry. The Prime Minister's office quickly issuing a statement saying the status quo on the Temple Mount has not changed. Hamas isn't happy. The terror group calling on Palestinians to escalate their clashes with what they call the criminal enemy and its settler gangs. While the United Nations peacekeeping force in Lebanon is calling for a timely Israeli withdrawal from South Lebanon. A month ago now, Israel and Hezbollah agreeing to a US-brokered 60-day ceasefire that calls for a phased Israeli military pull-out after more than a year of war. The Iranian-backed terror group started launching rockets and drones at Israel a day after the October 7th terror onslaught as a show of support for the Hamas terror group in Gaza. UNIFIL is concerned over what it describes as continued violations of UN Resolution 1701. The Israeli military saying only it is looking into UNIFIL's concerns. So still in studio, retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria, former Deputy Head of Assessment in the Israeli Military Intelligence, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. And Jacques, you know Lebanon so well, you know Israel so well, you know UNIFIL. What is your take on these latest developments?
Well, you know, the situation in South Lebanon is very complicated because there is a difference of interpretation between Israel and Lebanon, and specifically with Hezbollah. Hezbollah says that the resolution, the ceasefire, deals only with South Lebanon. It doesn't deal with north of the Litani River. Whereas Israel and the United States say no, 1701 deals with all Lebanon, which means that Hezbollah finds itself in a position where it cannot maneuver. On the one hand, it is confronting Israel. On the other hand, it has no more the backyard. Syria doesn't exist anymore. The Bashar al-Assad doesn't exist. So it's confined in a situation where it has to justify its existence. Why and what? How does Hezbollah do that? By convincing the public in Lebanon that the continuous impeachment of Israel on the ceasefire, by bombing inside Lebanon in the Bekaa, doing incursions in the villages and exploding. I mean, putting explosives in the house and so on. It means that Lebanon needs to be protected. And the only one that can protect Lebanon is not the Lebanese army, it's Hezbollah. So this is the way they are trying to justify their position, and the way to keep, to be part of the political body that right now is deciding about the fate of the next president in Lebanon. Right now, there are about 11 candidates. Nobody knows exactly who will be the president. Every Maronite in Lebanon thinks that in potential he is a president. So, I mean, this is an issue that is very, very, very difficult to take care of. And this is happening on the 9th of January, very, very soon. But I think that the most important event in Lebanon is the aftershock that is felt today in Lebanon because of what happened in Syria. And it brings the Sunni community into a situation where they are demanding total amnesty on all the Sunni prisoners that are present in jail in Lebanon, have been years in jail without trial, and they want and they are beginning to do protests and manifestations and all the rest. And this is creating a situation where Lebanon might slip into not a civil war, but certainly confrontation between different communities, and certainly with the Sunnis and the Shia.
So, talking of which, stay with us, because Lebanon says it's looking forward to having the best neighbourly relations with Syria, as you've been alluding to. It's the first official message to the new administration in Damascus since the spectacular fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime earlier this month. The two foreign ministers speaking on the phone. Syria's new Islamist de facto leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, is now trying to secure ties with Arab and Western leaders. Lebanon's Iranian-backed Hezbollah, of course, played a major part in supporting Assad through years of war before bringing its fighters back to Lebanon when the terror group started a war with Israel, as it showed its support for Hamas in Gaza. In the past, Hezbollah used Syria to bring in weapons from Iran through Iraq and Syria into Lebanon. Now, Syria's new authorities have today launched a security crackdown in a coastal region of the country, vowing to pursue remnants of the ousted Bashar al-Assad government. 14 policemen were killed there on Wednesday. Protests also breaking out in Syria following the circulation of a video showing an attack on a shrine in Aleppo, triggering widespread demonstrations. The protests highlighting calls for social justice and equality as Syrians grapple with the country's new political landscape. Our Alex Schloss has details in this report.
Protests erupted in Syria after a video of an attack on an Alawite shrine in Aleppo circulated online. While the demonstrations originated in the heartland of deposed Syrian ruler Bashar al-Assad's Alawite minority in the coastal cities of Tartus and Latakia, they soon spread.
We want all Syria to know that the Alawites in Kardaha are an essential part of this society and its fabric. We're not outsiders, we are the people of this area. We extend our hand to anyone who wants to build a new Syria free from injustice, discrimination, and inequality. We want social justice and the respect of people and their rights.
In the central city of Homs, a large crowd was seen fleeing gunfire. The source of that fire has not yet been identified. This comes just a day after hundreds protested in Damascus against the torching of a Christmas tree.
Our position is that of monitoring what may happen in order to judge if these factions that came, the HTS and the groups that are ruling now in Syria, are serious about creating a civil Syrian society where all its citizens have the opportunity to live freely, and especially its Christian citizens. So we are waiting.
Alongside the Alawite protest movement, 14 Syrian police officers were killed in an ambush by forces loyal to the ousted Assad government in the Tartus governorate. Syria's new interior minister, Mohammed Abdulrahman, is vowing to, quote, crack down on anyone who dares to undermine Syria's security or endanger the lives of its citizens.
There is no need for the events that happened in Tartus, and the HTS must hit those who went out in protests with an iron fist. Why are they going out and causing all this chaos? By God's will, there will be no civil war. All those were remnants of the previous regime.
Syria's new Islamist rulers have sought to assure religious and ethnic minorities that their rights will be upheld. But until proven capable of doing so, these protests will just be the latest in the string of security challenges facing the new administration that came to power just 2 weeks ago.
Middle East correspondent Ariel Ursaran, on top of all the latest developments too out of Syria, a crackdown on protesters, demonstrators calling for social justice. Your take, your insights, what are you learning?
Yeah, as we discussed in studio while this was airing, and Jacques pointedly added, this is how Iran destabilizes countries. This is a clear step from the Iranian playbook. Now, in this crackdown in the outskirts of Tartus, where the 14 security personnel were killed, they were ambushed yesterday on their way to arrest a leading Assad regime officer who is responsible for extrajudicial executions in the Sidnaya prison. Yesterday, the forces were ambushed. Today, they managed to apprehend him following firefights in the streets. This, in addition to the other incidents that we've seen, whether it's the burning of the biggest soccer stadium in Aleppo before a friendly match, a symbol to the rebirth of Syria, or the lighting of the Christmas tree. There are significant challenges that still remain in Syria moving forward, trying to make it a country, at least according to the statements of the de facto leadership, a nation for all Syrians, but there's still many remnants of the Assad regime, and they are definitely influenced by external efforts to further destabilize a pretty destabilized country, to say the least.
When you see those images out of Sidnaya prison, when you see the state of the country, the fighting, the range of groups,
the mass graves that continue to emerge.
And what is amazing,
devastating to look at.
What is amazing is that the general that was responsible for all those executions is an Assyrian, General Kanzo. I mean, this is a minority of the minority inside Syria. And this is the situation in Syria, where the country is divided into communities and minorities, where the Druze today have 7,000 armed militias and say, we are not going to surrender our weapons. And the Alawites want their case also to protect themselves. They will not surrender their weapons. The Kurds, the same. So the task that incomes today on Ahmadinejad is a very difficult one. And let us underline the fact that he gave his first speech in a mosque. But unlike the founder of the Islamic State, he did not declare a caliphate. He did not declare an Islamic State. On the contrary, he said that I want Syria unified. And this is the task, and this is what was, felt by most of the observers, and this was what pushed the United States, Britain, France, Italy, and the Emirates, Saudi Arabia to come to meet this man, see what sort of discussion can we have with this man who is different from. He has transformed from a Julani into a Shah, and this transformation is very important, and certainly vis-à-vis Israel, when he says that he doesn't want the Syrian territory to turn into a land that would provide attacks upon Israel. This is, I mean, unheard of, and maybe this is the opportunity that we have now. Instead of the Shiite crescent created by Iran, we have now a Sunni crescent that begins in Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Jordan, and this is of course in Egypt. And this is a different geostrategic situation that Israel must take profit of it.
Some have criticized Israel for its fast move into Syria in the very beginning in terms of Mount Hermon and other surrounds, creating that buffer zone. Israel said it was just a temporary measure, but realistically, given your experience in this field, security concerns, how long can Israel stay there in that buffer zone and surrounds?
Well, you know, Israel has signed an international agreement that has been processed by the Security Council. And I mean, we are not going to show ourselves as people who do not respect the signatures. This is one thing. Second, I mean, I understand the fact that because of the chaos that was in Syria, Israel had to go into the demilitarized zone and say, okay, we are here, and we'll wait and see what is going to be next. And if next is the government of Ahmad al-Shah, well, it's not so different from Hafiz Assad. And Bashar Assad, we did have negotiations with them about the Golan and about peace with Syria. So maybe this is the chance, the occasion to do so.
Well, certainly Israel has its hands full on several fronts at once. And I want to circle back to our top story. Obviously, the Israeli strikes in Yemen in just recent hours. Hamas has condemned them, not surprising. Iran has condemned them, not surprising. But that's not all. Ariel Osseran, Middle East correspondent, what's the latest development? Talk to us about the latest reaction to the developments in Yemen in recent hours.
Well, I think most interestingly, first, regarding the damages that were caused by these Israeli airstrikes, Saudi Al-Hadath reporting that the ports of Hudaydah and Ras Isa are completely out of commission. This is a key, not only infrastructure for Yemen and the Houthi specifically, but it's their main source of income through different oil activity. Also, the airstrikes on the airport in Sana'a destroyed 2 Houthi fighter jets. That's according to Houthi TV El Masira. But I think the most interesting response that we've been hearing regarding these airstrikes from all around the region comes from Yemen, from the chief of staff of the Yemeni government army. Those same forces that we discussed earlier in the program. We're talking about Sarir Hamoud Aziz. He obviously condemned Israel's strikes against civilian infrastructure, but said we hold the tyrant Abdul Malik al-Houthi and his terrorist group fully responsible for the destruction of the infrastructure, calling him the head of the evil, and basically pointing the fire at the internal threat coming from the Houthis. And this comes, as we discussed, amid the ongoing offensive coming from the southern region of Taiz, with claiming numerous Houthi fighter lives. And so, as I mentioned, this is something perhaps the most interesting for anyone following the internal situation in Yemen, to be following these advances, military advances on the ground, because from the air, Israel, the United States, the UK can bomb as much as they want, but it is the advancement on the ground that is critical, imperative for the hoped overthrow of the Houthi government.
Your response to exactly that?
I quite agree with that. I mean, without boots on the ground, there's nothing to. I mean, you will continue bombing. We will send, the scores of planes from Israel backwards. Every time we get a missile or 2 missiles, we get a raid. It will not end. In order to put an end to this story, boots on the ground has to be there. We have to encourage the Yemenite government, the legal one, to begin operations against the Houthi, together with the Saudis from the north, the Yemenite army from the south, the international force from the sea and from the air, and this might finally bring a situation where the Houthis might be eradicated.
Your take on the precision of this elite Air Force, the Israeli Air Force jets conducting this mission, they're already back in Tel Aviv, highly successful, no injuries in terms of Israel's capabilities. Give us an understanding of that mission. Your thoughts?
To go to Yemen, to fly to Yemen and backwards, it's 5 hours in the cockpit.
Right.
Can you imagine yourself 5 hours in a cockpit, reaching the target, pointing exactly, delivering the weapons to the point that you want? This has to be superhumans, super trained people, and this is in them we trust. And this is, I mean, the fate of this country is tied very much with the fate of those pilots and the material they have.
How worried is Iran watching these images out of Yemen?
Well, you know, Iran has had its own experience with the Israeli Air Force. They know that we have, I mean, unlike Yemen, which doesn't have any, the Houthis, which have, in fact, no efficient air defense. To reach Iran, we had to overcome the air defense of Syria, the air defense of Iraq, and then the air defense of Iran itself. Destroy 4 systems, air defense system, in order to reach them. And this the Iranians have very much in their mind.
Retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Nouria and Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran, appreciate your insights on this massive development on this day in the Middle East. Thank you for being here in studio. Our coverage continues. Day 2 of the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. Candles are being lit in homes across the globe each night for 8 days, with hopes and prayers that the hostages in Gaza will be returned home soon. More on the Festival of Miracles in this report by our Fabio Shapiro.
Put your yarmulke, because here comes Hanukkah. The Festival of Lights started this Wednesday, uniting Jewish communities around the world in celebration of the Maccabee revolt against the Hellenic forces over 2,000 years ago, and the miracle of the pot of oil that lasted enough to light the menorah for 8 straight days. But this year, Jews across the globe are asking for another miracle.
The holiday of Hanukkah holds great symbolism as it signifies the transition from darkness to light. We yearned for a miracle, hoping that the hostages would be back for Hanukkah, but unfortunately, it didn't occur. Nevertheless, we remain in hopeful anticipation and optimism that it will happen soon.
Tonight, as we light the lights of Hanukkah, we should think of being thankful, but we should also think of our brothers too, among whom there are still 138 innocent children. Women are in the captivity of a sadist terror organization in Gaza. Let's think of them too. We light the candles for them too.
It's very important to show Israel and the whole world, and especially the families of the hostages, that we stand together with them.
With the war nearing its 500th day, and with the renewal of hostage release negotiations, the hopes for a return of the captives are rising. But there is yet much to be done to reach an end to the conflict. Hamas is yet to send a list of hostages to be returned, and Israel refuses to give up strategic locations such as the Philadelphia corridor that required a large human sacrifice to achieve. Israeli government officials praised the IDF soldiers as they lit their candles.
Our soldiers are acting determinedly and bravely while risking their lives to defeat the enemy and also to bring their hostages back home.
Outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden lit a candle and warned Israel of the PR problem brought by the war.
We continue to provide military assistance to Israel until they get rid of Hamas. But we have to be careful. They have to be careful. The whole world's public opinion can shift overnight. We can't let that happen.
An issue Israeli activist Noah Tishby is taking personally. Besides the constant work in support of the hostage families, Tishby is hosting influential Jews for candle lighting, starting with American actress Gwyneth Paltrow.
What is some of the Hanukkah traditions that you have at your house?
We always light the menorah. We always gather together, and after we light the candles, it's very sweet actually. We all hug and we bring in the light.
But while the return of the hostages is still the main wish for this Hanukkah, European leaders do not forget the rapid rise of anti-Semitism that is lurking the continent.
There should be no place for this hatred, especially here in Europe. And there is no justification to the rise in anti-Semitism, no war, no political argument can excuse it.
In the name of the German government, I will say very clearly, we will not let our free democracy, our country, our society be destroyed by hate-filled idiots. We will stand up against them. In light of our history, and it happened here in Berlin, we will not tolerate for them to destroy our country and to discriminate against people of Jewish belief or other people who are being discriminated against and to make them victims again. We will defend our society.
Where there is light, there is hope. And as the Jewish world gathers to light the Hanukkah, eat latkes, and spin the dreidel, the hopes for better times ahead shall be joined in unison.
And now to end, a slightly different take on one of the top stories in this region. Syrian comedians have been given a new lease of life following the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Our Joe Brown tells us why.
What do you call a group of comedians performing freely for the first time since the fall of a decades-long dictatorial regime without worry of repercussions for their jokes?
From now on, never again fear. After the fall of Bashar al-Assad, nothing can scare us anymore.
While Syria's comedy scene has been thriving for a long time, its censorship has been no joke. Bashar al-Assad's regime banned comedians from joking about certain topics, including elections, the economy, and of course, Assad himself. But now, with new leadership in the country, comedians are feeling a weight off their shoulders, allowing them to put more emphasis on material that only 1 month ago could have led to a heavy prison sentence. And it's not just comedians who are feeling the calm, but the audience too.
The last show I attended had restrictions, but today's show is different. There were no restrictions. They were able to speak freely without fear of accountability, and we no longer go to bed afraid. Today, we feel much more at ease.
Whilst many questions remain as to how Ahmed al-Sharaa will govern, Syria's funny men and women have no fear.
I believe some form of understanding will emerge because you can't have a revolution that spanned 13 years and 30 or 40 years of struggle before that, only to end up with the authorities that would dictate what we can and cannot say. They must learn to get used to freedom of speech and listen to us.
The Syrian people have been through a lot in recent years, but the old saying holds true, the best medicine is laughter.
The best medicine indeed. Thank you, Joe. And that is a wrap for this edition of The Rundown. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for watching. This is I24 News.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
En nuestro próximo programa Luces sin Fronteras, una especial colaboración del Departamento de Emprendimientos Sionistas y I-24 News, haremos brillar la luz de Hanukkah entre Israel y el mundo hispano, resaltando la resiliencia del pueblo judío. Nos conectaremos con las comunidades judías latinoamericanas y mucho más. Un programa que brillará desde Israel al mundo. News 24, el magazine de análisis y noticias en español de I-24 News.
Hello and welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Each week, we'll focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and throughout the diaspora. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Nicole Zedek. Nicole.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Police are investigating reports of gunshots fired at a Toronto Jewish girls' school for the 3rd time this year. Beis Chaya was also shot at in May and October. Elsewhere in Canada, a synagogue in Montreal was attacked with a firebomb last week for the 2nd time in a year, all just the latest in a series of anti-Semitic attacks in Canada. In one of his final acts as president, Joe Biden has commuted the sentence of 37 out of the 40 people on death row. Of the 3 that weren't, one of them was Robert Bowers, who killed 11 Jews at the Tree of Life Synagogue in 2018. Biden said he didn't want to commute the sentences of those who committed acts of terror or hate-motivated mass murders. 160 children and 40 women were rescued in Guatemala from the fringe fundamentalist Jewish sect Lev Tahor. Police raided the Lev Tahor premises following allegations of child abuse, rape, and human trafficking. Suspected bones of one child were also found at the site. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer nominated former MP Luciana Berger for a life peerage, meaning she'll sit in the UK's House of Lords. Berger was a vocal opponent of former Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn and quit the party in 2019 due to anti-Semitism within Labour. Mike Katz, chair of the Jewish Labour movement, has also received a life peerage. And former boxing champion Floyd Mayweather donated $1 million to United Hatzalah, the Israeli volunteer-led emergency services. In a United Hatzalah gala in Miami, Mayweather gave an impassioned speech saying United Hatzalah volunteers are, like him, fighters. Last year, he donated 100 bulletproof vests and helmets to protect United Hatzalah's volunteers during the outbreak of the war with Hamas. Now, those are the top 5 stories in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
As As the U.S. Congress comes to a close for 2024, an event was held last week at the U.S. Capitol to mark the triumphs and struggles in the U.S.-Israel relationship. The event also highlighted the renewed attention in the effort in Congress to approve a commemorative coin of late Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. Here's more from I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, who says the bipartisan event was largely upbeat, but some members did let their frustrations out.
Both Democratic and Republican Congress members attending the event last week here in the Capitol were eager to tout the bipartisan nature of the initiatives that made it through this last Congress regarding the U.S.-Israel relationship in terms of development of the Abraham Accords, missile and defense technology, trade, tourism, you name it. But there's no doubt there's also been tensions between the Democratic Party and the Israeli government since the outset of the Israel-Hamas war and through the American election season. We asked members of both sides of the aisle whether they felt bipartisan support, true bipartisan support, was slipping away.
Further than slipping away, they've led factions against Israel. And they tried to do it, kind of, in my opinion, subversively. But they need to be held accountable on this, because when they didn't show up, when Benjamin Netanyahu came to our chambers, that is a total abomination that should have never happened. And I was embarrassed. But you noticed a large portion of the Democrats did not show up. I think most of all the Republicans did. But it's a new day. It's time to be optimistic.
People have to understand that the vast majority of the Democratic Party stands with Israel. We understand that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East and is an ironclad partner and friend to the United States of America. I have no doubt that the pro-Israel vast majority of our party will rise for the next presidential election.
Last week's event was also dedicated to advancing an initiative to mint a congressionally approved commemorative coin in honor of former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, who grew up here in America. Now, to do that, you need 2/3 of the House and the Senate to approve. It's a tall order. The event being led on the Democratic side by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, on the Republican side by Congressmember Anthony Garbarino. Wasserman Schultz told us she's optimistic that Congress can get it done in the next session.
The entire approach to a commemorative gold coin bill is a bipartisan one. So, I mean, Congressman Garbarino and I worked together on the Golda Meir Commemorative Coin Act, and we got very close to the 290 co-sponsors that you needed to bring it to the floor. There was not as much energy behind the effort in the Senate, so we're just going to push the reset button and try again.
The fact that it isn't getting done is a certain Democratic leadership has told everyone, do not vote on this, just like we don't want you to vote on the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act until the elections are over. Well, now the elections are over and we're still hitting the same challenges. So we have some disgruntled leaders on the Democratic side who are telling their people not to sign on to this. And I'm very troubled by it because, again, it's partisan politics, but I believe a lot of that's going to evaporate in the next few months.
The new Congress is set to be sworn in on January 3rd, with Republicans holding a slim majority in both the House and the Senate. Reporting here from the Capitol, Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
The Jewish Institute for Television and Cinema and USC's Norman Lear Center have released a new study about Jewish representation, or lack thereof, in Hollywood. It found that 30% of Jewish characters were portrayed as wealthy, 50% with, quote, elite jobs, and half of Jewish parents were considered overbearing, and just under half of male characters had 2 or more characteristics associated with the nebbish stereotype. With all the focus on diversity on screen, Jews are continuing to be sidelined. We are now joined live from New York City by Allison Josephs of the Jewish Institute for Television and Cinema. Thank you very much for being here. And let's start by telling us more about the shocking results of this study.
Yeah, so I think that there is this misconception that because Jews, quote unquote, run Hollywood, that our representation is fine. And so I think we need to clarify that misconception, which I would actually call a trope. 100 years ago, several Jews founded Hollywood because they were escaping persecution. They were shut out of many fields, not so different from what we're seeing today, to be honest. And they built this empire of their own, as historian Neil Gabler put it. But a lot of what they built into the Jewish characters that they put on the screen was that sense of shame and, self-hatred that they got. And what that looked like was self-erasure, assimilation, caricatures, tropes. And to be fair, much of Hollywood was doing this to many minority groups for most of the time. This study focused on Jews in general, and then we had a smaller subset on Orthodox Jews. We would love to also study Israeli characters in a future study. It's our hypothesis that the Israeli character that used to be the helpful Krav Maga person or the ex-Mossad agent that would help fight the bad guys, there's now what we're seeing anecdotally is an increased viciousness and violence in Israeli characters and kind of putting the blood libel of Jews onto the Israeli characters themselves. And so we'd like to study how those characters used to be and how they're being portrayed now. But if you kind of take a step back and you think about the vilification of Orthodox Jews, and that was actually the most vilified group of the bunch, with, about half of Orthodox mentions being negative or judgmental, around a third of speaking Orthodox Jews being ex-Orthodox, a high frequency of dissatisfaction in their lives. If you think about what makes us uniquely Jewish, it's our heritage and it's our land. And if you think about Jews that are the most connected to Jewish heritage and the most connected to Jewish land, it's not surprising that that would be the ways that we would be the most attacked on screen. And so we need to be aware that these issues exist, and we need to demand the same protections every other group gets. And that's exactly the work that JITC Hollywood Bureau is doing.
Well, and it's a lot of work. I mean, we're seeing also, the silence of so many, Jewish celebrities that haven't spoken up. Of course, we know, many who have, Michael Rappaport, Deborah Messing, for example. But also the truth is so many of the producers, directors as well are Jews, which is seemingly, carrying on the whole idea of a history of assimilating because of what happened even in the time of Louis B. Mayer and whatnot. So what can be done also within the entertainment industry to make a difference and change that?
So one of the things, besides getting the consultants in the room and sort of calling out what the problems are, we would like to build writers' labs in the future where we take Jewish writers and we teach them Torah, we teach them Jewish history, we have them have meaningful Shabbat and holiday experiences, so Jewish pride and Jewish knowledge can be filled within, and that will affect the types of storytelling that we do. It's not surprising that after thousands of years of being exiled and persecuted and pogromed, that we would be filled with some, shame. And while the founders of Hollywood ran from their Jewish identity in order to try to escape anti-Semitism, the message that we're trying to give over with JITC Hollywood Bureau is lean in harder, lean in prouder, know who you are. Like, take Michael Rappaport. He's been rapping to fill in, since probably January of last year, doing this very publicly. Let's stop apologizing and being ashamed for our unique traditions. Let's find the meaning and beauty in them. We have to realize now, when the world hates us so much, we can only respond with a greater amount of self-love. So we want to try to build a new crop of Jewish creatives that have that kind of love, put those expressions on the screen, and inspire Jews all around the world.
Wow, beautifully said. Thank you very much, Allison Josephs of the Jewish Institute for Television and Cinema. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me on.
Shylock is one of the most infamous Jewish figures in literature, even nearly 500 years later. The villainous moneylender came to personify the long-lasting tropes against Jews. Well, now, this week, a highly accomplished British Jewish actress, Tracy-Ann Oberman, is set to take the stage in London's West End, playing Shylock. And we're so pleased to go to London, where we are joined by Tracy-Ann Oberman. Hello, Anna. Thank you for being here. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Shalom. I hope you're all well. Literally about to run down on the stage, but it was so nice to be able to talk to you about this.
Yes.
I mean, it's traditionally a male role, so
of course
this is the first female Shylock to hit
I mean, that's
the
quite
stage.
historic. I mean, this is a historic situation for you, but we know that, playing many acting roles, you are known for that, but it seems like the part that's closest to your heart is something that doesn't involve acting. It's fighting anti-Semitism and, being very public about it when a lot of Jewish celebrities are remaining silent.
Well, I think being Jewish is a huge part of my identity, and I didn't realize quite how much it was until the anti-Semitism was going left unchecked, particularly amongst the progressive left in England. I looked around for the grown-ups to come in the Labour Party, for example, and nobody did. And I just felt, as somebody who comes from a Holocaust background and a pogrom background, I know when good people stay silent, the end game is. And, I think this play, Merchant of Venice 1936, is merging my activism, my need for people to understand what anti-Semitism is, and my skill as an actor and a producer and as a writer together to create a really potent piece of theatre that has done a lot of good in explaining.
For sure. I mean, and to, play this role, which, people think of Shylock, they think of Al Pacino, but now they're going to think of you. And I think that that obviously also says a lot. And I understand because of your background, you are drawing on your own experience and your own personal family and taking on this role. Tell us more.
Yes. Well, I always wanted to there was a lot of talk in this country about not doing this play anymore because it's a problematic play. And it was around the same time they were throwing statues into the river. I say just because history is unpleasant, you shouldn't get rid of it and erase it. You need to reclaim it. So I wanted to use my great-grandmother, my Bubba Annie, who came over from the shtetls and the pogroms of Belarus. She grew up in the East End of London. She was a strong, tough Jewish matriarch. We all know what those are like. Huge poverty over here. Big part of the labour movement. And then she came face to face with Oswald Mosley and the British Union of Fascists in 1936. When he marched on the Jewish entity, fully protected by the Metropolitan Police, to show the Jews that they weren't welcome. And on that day, my Bubba always told me that the Irish working class neighbours, the English working class neighbours, the small Afro-Caribbean community, all these ordinary heroes from all over the country said, if you come for the Jews, you come for us all. And they stood together and they pushed Mosley and his fascists back. So that's what I wanted to infuse in this play. Also, to remind them that way before the State of Israel was even existed, anti-Semitism and the sort of tropes and the stereotypes that we're seeing now and the placards were going very strong even then. And so people must be very careful when they criticize Israel, that they actually criticize Israel and they don't bleed into anti-Semitic tropes that have been knocking around since the Middle Ages in Britain.
Well, and now with social media and the age we're in, it's just something that has grown like an uncontrollable fire. But let's not forget, even when the Shakespearean Elizabethan England, when these plays were being performed, they didn't even allow women, like they had boys and young men playing female characters. Well, so what's that about?
Well, to be honest, but forget the women, there were no, Shakespeare wrote this play where there were no Jews living in England, 200 years after every Jew had been kicked out of England very violently, stripped of everything and kicked out. They were still so deeply anti-Semitic that you have plays like The Jew of Malta and The Merchant of Venice being written where an evil Jew trying to control everything and take blood and all those medieval tropes was still coming to the surface in these hugely successful plays. And, this was Hitler's favourite play. He loved it. There's no confidence about that. And yet I think somehow in the way that I've done it and why I think it's coming back into the West End twice, it's been going on a national tour, it's been a huge, huge success. I think it just speaks to people because I think they can see exactly what it is. It's taught very badly and people need to see it. And having a woman at the front shows just quite how misogyny and racism is tied together. And it makes it for a very potent bit of theatre.
Yeah. Given that you have such a vast repertoire of experience, what is it like? I mean, this is a figure that even if you don't study Shakespeare, you've heard of Shylock.
Well, that's the thing. Shylock and Fagin, the two British Jewish archetypes, these are the archetypal characters in literature. And Shylock, the idea of a Jew saying, my money, my daughter, my ducats, where money is the most important thing to him. It's never taught, it's never explained what that's all about. So taking on this character and really making it my own and turning it into a female matriarch who's been spat on in the streets, who's treated like dirt, who's treated like an immigrant dog, and has this one daughter that she wants to give a better life to, but not move too far away. And then that daughter gets snatched away. And to have these fascist aristocrats really try and destroy her. It's a really interesting piece of theatre. And you know what? We're living in such interesting times. You know, I'm not saying it's like the 1930s, but there is a lot of similarity, lots of, you know, extreme on the right and on the left. And as ever, Jews get squeezed in the middle.
Tracy-Ann Oberman, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to meet you, even though remotely, but I'll see you on the West End, I hope soon.
Bye.
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 As each year passes, more survivors of the Holocaust are now passing away, limiting the number of firsthand experiences of the atrocities inflicted on the Jewish people in Europe in the first half of the 20th century. Most of the remaining survivors of concentration camps were young when they had to deal with these horrors, and this includes Evelyn Ashkolovitz, who survived 3 concentration camps before the age of 7. I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown has her story.
Someone who is 9, 10, 12 years old remembers. But for me, it's all flashes. And as nobody talked about it, I didn't talk about it either.
Evelyn Ashkolovitz was born in Amsterdam in 1938 to German parents who fled their homeland after the rise in Nazism. However, the Nazis conquered the Netherlands in 1940, and after 3 years of hiding, a neighbour gave them up to the authorities, and she, along with her parents, were sent to Vught and Westerbork camps in the Netherlands before being sent back to Germany and to the infamous Bergen-Belsen concentration camp.
When I was little, between the ages of 4 and 6, when things were too complicated, too hard, I had the ability to put myself in a bubble and not be there anymore. In the first camp, after I'd had all the illnesses, after I'd really nearly died, because Vught was a camp where children died of hunger, misery, and disease, I stopped being there. I was in a bubble of misery.
After 2.5 years of moving around camps and suffering from diseases such as measles and chickenpox, which the doctors thought would kill her, Evelyn and her parents were liberated by the Red Cross. But because of her young age, she doesn't remember a lot of what happened during those years, and it was often considered a taboo subject, both at home and among her peers. However, in 2012, almost 70 years after her liberation, she saw a familiar name on a Nazi document collected by the Red Cross, at which point the horrors that she was a part of had sunk in.
There was my name, Evelyn Sulzbach, not the daughter of, my name on individual cards, Vught, Westerbork, Bergen-Belsen, on lists and individual cards. And suddenly, it became reality when I saw my name printed on them. It wasn't just that my parents' daughter had been in the camps. I'd been there. And so it became. It wasn't 2012. It became a reality, that it was true.
After this, and with the rise in anti-Semitic attacks in Western Europe, Evelyn decided to make her story known. Alongside her son, the French journalist Claude Ashkolovitch, she wrote a book detailing her horrors in 2023. And to this day, she is still visiting schools and speaking at public events to tell her story and keep the memories of those awful years alive.
I decided in 2015 that as part of the very, very last generation, that I had to tell. And so now I tell the story. I go around schools in France and I only talk about the role of the Netherlands, which is a terrible role, because 75% of the Jews in the Netherlands didn't come back. It's the mirror of France, and I tell the story. They listen to me. I receive messages afterward. So I tell myself that somewhere, I hope I leave a trace, that it may have existed, and that it did exist.
just heard a song called Toramente by Yosef Daniel, a singer-musician here in Israel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, thank you.
So you've had quite a journey from Mexico to Texas to Israel to now a proud Jewish man singing songs of hope.
Definitely. You know, it's always been part of me. Music has always been part of, you know, my makeup. My grandfather was a musician. I had uncles that were musicians, singers, and I actually didn't grow up Jewish. I grew up as a Christian and, you know, evangelical Christian in America, in Texas, and, you know, always part of music. And so, you know, we found our Jewish roots, converted to Judaism, and here we are, you know, 14 years later.
So what made you do this noble move to find it and just say, okay, peace out?
Well, there's definitely, you know, a couple of years of learning, studying, and really doing introspection and really like wanting to know, to get to the bottom of, you know, really what is it that I believe in as a Christian, and also, to be honest with you, you know, finding Jewish roots was a big part of it. It was a huge part of saying, you know what, I'm going to embrace this. Didn't know what it really meant, you know, at the beginning, but you know, as time went, you know, really understood, you know, the depth of it, you know, the beauty of it, and one of the main characters was David, King David, right? David HaMelech, a musician, and you know, I was just really drawn towards everything, really.
So now that you're here, you know, the song we just heard, a Hanukkah song, why is music so important, you know, in Judaism to, you know, uplift us when many holidays are not festivals of lights and happiness like Hanukkah?
Right, so, you know, music is an expression, you know, of the heart. It's an expression of the heart, and in this case, the expression that we're giving, you know, with these songs, you know, for Hanukkah is I think it's definitely, it's important because of the fact that it's an expression, you know, it's an expression that's universal as well, you know, with everything that's going on in the world today, especially geared towards us, you know, one way that we can express ourselves freely without having any boundaries and it's music. Music doesn't have any boundaries. It doesn't have, you know, it's a language in itself. Let's say it's a universal language. And so I always saw the importance of music within every single holiday, every single Chag. You know, it just connects you a lot stronger.
Happy Hanukkah to all of you, and thank you so much for watching Jewish World Weekly. And without further ado, we are going to hear from Yosef Daniel. Take it away, my friend.
Thank you. מעוצו ישועתי, לך נאה לשבח, תיקון בית תפילתי, ושם תודה נזבח, לעת תכין מטבח, מצהל נבח, אז אגמור ושיר מזמור, חנוכת המזבח, אז אגמור בשיר מזמור.